Welcome to The Explainer. We're going to talk about one of India's most crucial environmental laws today. But the real story, the fascinating part, is how it even came to be in the first place. It's quite a tale.
So, what could possibly connect a global summit, a horrific national tragedy, and what became India's most powerful environmental law? Well, it turns out they're all pieces of the same puzzle. And today, we're going to put that puzzle together to see how the Environment Protection Act of 1986 was born.
All right, so let's rewind. Our story really kicks off back in the 1970s. India was in the middle of a huge industrial boom. And while that meant progress and growth, it was also having a massive and frankly pretty scary impact on the environment. And it wasn't just India, the whole world was starting to wake up to these issues. In 1972, you have the Stockholm Conference. This was a huge deal. It was the very first time leaders from around the globe got together just to talk about the environment. India was right there at the table, and it really lit a fire, creating this new global push to protect the planet. And India didn't just talk the talk. Coming out of that conference, the country started to act. A whole bunch of laws got passed. You had one for wildlife, another for water pollution, one for forests, and another for air pollution. Seemed like a good start, right? Well, here's the catch. All these laws were kind of doing their own thing. They were operating in silos. Think of it like a patchwork quilt. You've got all these individual pieces, but nothing was really stitching them together into one solid blanket. This piecemeal approach left these huge, dangerous gaps in the system. And tragically, that weakness was about to be exposed in the worst way possible. This is where everything changes. A single event that became a massive turning point, sending shockwaves that were felt not just in India, but all around the world. The year is 1984, a year that will forever be linked to one of the most devastating industrial disasters in human history. We're talking about the Bhopal gas tragedy. A pesticide plant owned by Union Carbide leaked massive amounts of a deadly gas called methyl isocyanate into the city. The immediate result was catastrophic. Thousands died almost instantly. But the horror didn't stop there. The environment was poisoned for years, the air, the water, the soil. And what this disaster did was rip the bandage off a very painful truth. India's existing patchwork of laws was nowhere near enough to prevent something like this. After Bhopal, there was no looking away. The government had to face a really hard truth. They needed a completely new game plan. Not just another small law, but something big, something powerful, something comprehensive. And the idea they came up with was what we call umbrella legislation. The name is perfect, really. Instead of a bunch of tiny, separate umbrellas for different problems, the idea was to create one giant protective umbrella that would cover every single aspect of the environment. One law to coordinate a single, strong response to any threat. So that's exactly what happened. In 1986, Parliament enacted the Environment Protection Act. And you've got to understand, this wasn't just another piece of legislation. This was a direct answer to the horrors of Bhopal. It was the government finally making good on the promises that were made all the way back in 1972 at that Stockholm conference. Okay, so what actually makes this law so powerful? Well, a huge part of its strength comes from how it defines things. The language is intentionally really, really broad. Let's take environmental pollutant, for example. The definition is brilliant in its simplicity. It doesn't list out a bunch of specific chemicals. No, it just says it's any solid, liquid, or gaseous substance that could be harmful to the environment. That's it. This makes it totally future-proof because it can apply to new chemicals we haven't even invented yet. And then there's the definition of environment itself. This is where it gets really clever. It's not just the obvious stuff, water, air, and land. The law specifically includes the interrelationship between them. And get this, it also includes us, human beings, plus other creatures, plants, microorganisms, and even property. It treats the environment like the complex, interconnected web that it is. It recognizes that polluting the water doesn't just hurt the water, it hurts the air, the land, the wildlife, and the people. The act was designed to protect that entire system. But look, you can have the best written law in the world, but if you can't enforce it, it's just words on paper. And this is where the courts came in. The judiciary in India stepped up and gave this act some real teeth, creating legal principles that are now the foundation of environmental justice in the country. One of the biggest game changers came from the Supreme Court. Before, if there was an accident, a company could try to wiggle out of it by claiming it was an act of God or some other weird exception. Well, the court said no more.
They brought in a new principle called absolute liability. It's simple. If your company deals with dangerous stuff, you are 100% liable for any harm it causes. Period. No excuses, no loopholes. Next up, they cemented the polluter pays principle. And this one is exactly what it sounds like. If you pollute, you pay. You pay to clean it up, you pay to restore the environment, and you pay to compensate the people who were harmed. It totally shifts the financial burden from the public, from us, onto the shoulders of the polluter. And the third big one is the precautionary principle. This is basically the legal version of better safe than sorry. It means that a company can't just say, well, we're not 100% sure this will cause harm as an excuse to do nothing. If there's a serious threat, the responsibility is on them to prove it's safe, not on the public to prove it's dangerous. You have to act before disaster strikes, not after.
So, let's put it all together. You see this really clear story arc, don't you? You start with a bunch of scattered, weak laws. Then, a horrific tragedy exposes just how broken that system is. Out of that crisis, a powerful umbrella law is created. And then, the courts give that law real power, with principles like absolute liability and polluter pays. It's a journey from chaos to a cornerstone of India's environmental law.
Which brings us to a final big question. This act was forged in the fire of a 20th century industrial disaster. It was designed for that world. So the question we have to ask ourselves today is, how well does this umbrella, this shield from the past, protect us from the totally different and maybe even bigger environmental challenges we're facing in the 21st century?